What's up, Pioneer family? So in this video, I'm gonna be talking about the Boston Fern and how to take care of your Boston Fern. So it is not too hard once you know what this guy likes, and to know what this guy likes, or girl, whatever this Boston Fern is, to know what they like, you want to think about where they come from, right? And this is with any plant, right? If you think about where it comes from, you will have a much better understanding about how to take care of this plant. And so these ferns grow in the understory, right? These ferns grow below plants, below trees, in the forest, below the canopy, right? So you're not gonna see this in nature in full sun. This is gonna be underneath other plants, giving it shade. So first things first is light. And that kind of takes us into, oh, it is getting windy out here. That kind of takes us into the first thing. And so when you're thinking about in nature, this does not get too much light because it is getting shaded by the canopy of the trees in the forest, and therefore we don't want to give this full sun. We want to give this indirect light. So if you're in your home, just make sure that it's not too close to the window in the summer seasons, especially if you're in a climate that gets very hot and gets very sunny and very dry. Not really what this guy likes. And so just make sure that it's not too close to a window, unless you just don't get much sun, right? If you're in a place that doesn't get much sun, scratch that and put it closer to the window. This obviously depends on your climate, but we don't want full sun with this. We want a couple hours of indirect light a day, right? A couple hours of indirect filtered light. So for me, I like to grow these outside, and so I will just put this under my big shade tree right behind me, and it works great. It doesn't get too much sun at all back here. It is pretty shaded most of the day, and you're just getting that filtered light. That filtered light, that is key. You don't want this thing to get full sun. If you are giving it full sun, you're gonna have a dead plant. You're gonna have a dead fern, because that is not where they grow in nature. So indirect light. Number two is watering, right? When should you water this? So you should water it when it needs water. That is obviously a goofy thing to say, but it is kind of true, right? Of course, with every plant, you want to give it water when it needs water, but how do we know when it needs water? So one thing you can do is just stick your finger in this plant. If it is dry about an inch and a half before you feel moisture, you know it's time to water. And so that is kind of a good way to tell. If you stick your finger in there, it's wet, you're good to go. If you stick your finger in there and it's dry for about an inch and a half, you know you want to water it. And when you do water it, you don't want to just pour a bunch of water on, because a lot of times when you do that, the soil can't really take in that water. That water would just roll right off the top of that dry soil, go down the sides of your pot, and just go out. So we want to water it a little bit so that top can kind of get a little bit moist, and then we want to come in and soak it so that soil can really take up that water, and water your plant. Again, that kind of goes with any plant. That's how I like to water it. If it's in a pot, get that surface a little bit moist, wait a couple of minutes, and then come back and really do a full watering. If you can't stick your finger in this plant because it's just too much and there's no place to put your finger, you can kind of just do the weight test. So if you pick this guy up and it is super light, you know it's time to water. If you pick it up and it is heavier, you know that there is a lot of water still in here and you are good to go. And so when you do fully water, pick it up so you can kind of start getting a feel of what this feels like when it is fully watered, because then you will know when you pick it up and it's getting pretty light that, hey, that's light, it's probably dried a couple inches down, it's time to water. So that's another way you can kind of tell when this plant needs water. So either stick your finger down or do the weight test. When it comes to soil, the kind of last thing that we want to talk about with this plant, what soil do you want to use? Well, this is not a succulent, so we don't want to use something that's super sandy or has pebbles in it or something like that. We want to use, again, we're going to go back to nature. It is going to be in an understory plant. Those leaves are going to fall down and they're going to feed the soil. Where these plants grow is going to have very nutritious, very good soil. So we want to give it very good soil. So we're going to want to use a compost, a very high quality compost, and then you're going to mix that with some either peat or coco coir. Coco coir being a little bit more sustainable than peat, but either one will work, and that will help retain moisture. And then we are going to put in some perlite. Some people use sand. I like perlite a little bit better, but again, both will kind of work. But I just like perlite. It's just my personal opinion. If you ask somebody else, I'm sure they might say sand, and that is, if it works for you, it works for you. But the perlite or sand would just help it drain. So just like almost any other plant, we want the soil to be able to hold moisture, but we want it to be able to also drain. And so those kind of two things are kind of competing. We want it to hold the water, but we also want it to be able to drain very, very easy. So that coco coir or peat moss will help retain that moisture, but we also want to put in that perlite so it can drain the water, so it's not just sitting in water and getting root rot or anything like that. So we want to use that good quality compost with some peat moss or coco coir, and then with some perlite or sand. That is a really good mix for this plant, for the Boston fern. And it will love it and be very happy you gave it to it, and it will thrive. So if you're doing all those three things correctly, also I should mention the pot that I like to use is I just keep them in this nursery pot, in the plastic pot. The plastic pot will retain moisture a little bit better than if you're using like a terracotta. It won't dry out as much. For some things, terracotta is great. For the ferns, I do like using the plastic nursery pot. It really, really holds the water and it works very, very good. So if you're doing all those things correctly, this should thrive for you. You should have no problems or very little problems. Usually plants are gonna have some kind of problem. And so if it does have problems, you might see very light green leaves. It's not really supposed to be like that. You might have some burning tips. It might get very droopy. Those are kind of the problems that you might see with the fern. If you're seeing those problems, kind of just check. Go back and check if you're doing everything right, right? If you're letting it have 5-6 hours of sun, well, there you go. If it looked good in the spring, but then the summertime it got hot and you haven't moved locations of the plant, and that's when it started to kind of mess up, you might be giving it too much light. But move it around to try to diagnose it, the problem, right? And if you kind of try and error if you have the problems. If it's too much light, move it. If that fixes a problem, great. If you are seeing that it's holding too much water, that can cause problems. If the water is just sitting in this pot, that's no good. that can cause problems. And so just try to diagnose the problem. But if you are doing everything that I just said with the light soil and watering, you should be fine. And these should be very dark green and really beautiful plants. And you should have little to no problems. In the next video I make about these, I will show you how to propagate these plants. It is very, very easy to propagate. And so I will make that in the next video. Love you guys. Until next time, I will see you in a garden. Peace out.